You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, the Spurs are on another 8-game winning streak after blowing out the Phoenix Suns and Sacramento Kings coming out of the All-Star break. San Antonio has reached a title contender marker. And finally, looking at how the Spurs have taken care of business this season against bad teams and injured teams. Welcome back to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. There's only 2 games to go over this past week because the Spurs just came out of the All-Star break. So let's go ahead and jump right into those 2 games. So let's go back to Thursday. It was the Spurs' return from All-Star break. They're in Austin, Texas, playing basically home games in Austin during the actual rodeo road trip, hosting the Phoenix Suns. Now, I do want to mention that the Suns were without some key players. They were without Dillon Brooks, who was serving a league suspension for accruing his 16th technical foul of the season. Grayson Allen was also on the injured list. And even though Devin Booker did play in the first quarter and a little bit of the second, he ended up getting hurt in the first half and did not return to the game for the remainder of the game. And as we know, Booker's one of the leading go-to players for the Suns, so he was basically out for that whole second half. He only played 9 minutes. The Spurs were healthy with their full 10-man rotation, and so they were favored by 7.5 points. This game got out of the hand in the second quarter where the Spurs got some separation from the Suns, going on a 13-0 run to begin the quarter, building an 18-point lead within the first 4 minutes of the second quarter. So then the Spurs go into halftime, again, leading comfortably by 12 points. Then at the third, the Spurs really push this game open, where they end up going on a 26-9 run in the first 7 minutes of the third quarter, and the game becomes a blowout for the rest of the way, where the Spurs led by as many as 32 points, and the reserves ended up closing out the game in the fourth, with San Antonio winning comfortably by 27 points. The top 3 players in this game were Victor Wembanyama, ends up with 17 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, and 5 blocks in just 25 minutes because of how much the Spurs were leading by. Wemby did have 10 paint points in that game. Stephon Castle is the second best Spurs player with 20 points, 4 assists, and 3 steals in only 21 minutes because, again, the Spurs had a big lead, so he didn't have to play much. And then finally, De'Aaron Fox is the third best player for the Spurs with 15 points, 8 assists in only 22 minutes as well because, of course, the Spurs led by a healthy margin there against the Suns. Then let's go to Saturday. The Spurs are still in Austin for the second game of that series, in Austin, Texas, hosting the Sacramento Kings, who did arrive with some key injuries. They were without Domantas Sabonis and Zach LaVine, who are out for the rest of the season. The Spurs did have their full 10-man rotation. And so, as I mentioned in last week's pod, if you listen, I asked the question of, how much are the Spurs going to be favored by? Because the Kings at that time were on a 14-game losing streak. Well, entering this game, they were on a 15-game losing streak. And so the Spurs were favored by 18.5 points. That is the most they have been favored by in any game this season. So basically 19 points was that, the over-under there for the Spurs. Now, I do want to give the Kings credit because they didn't just come out and, play like a team that should have just lost by, by more than 19 points. They actually fought in this game. So early on, the Spurs looked like it was going to turn into a blowout. They led by 15 early in the first quarter. However, give the Kings credit. They came back, especially with their bench, and they really, clawed back in the game, and they kept it pretty close for the remainder of the game up until late in the third quarter. With 1.5 minutes until the fourth quarter was about to begin, the Spurs went on a 7-0 run to lead by as many as 11 points going into the fourth. And then it was pretty much over in the fourth. The Spurs really took control, going on 2 different runs where they saw their lead grow to as many as 28 points. And basically, once again, the reserves for the Spurs closed out the game, and San Antonio won comfortably by 17 points there in the fourth quarter. And again, give the Kings credit, the fact they actually made it a fight for good chunks of that game outside of the fourth quarter. The top 3 players for the Spurs were the same 3 players once again for San Antonio. Their 3 go-to players. It was Victor Wembanyama, ends up with 28 points, 15 rebounds, 6 assists, and 4 blocks. And I rounded it to 30 minutes, but it was like 29.5 minutes. Wemby, again, just the Kings had no answers for him in the paint. He was playing his fellow countryman, Maxine Reynaud, starting center there for the Kings. Wemby ends up with 18 paint points, 16 points from dunk layup range, multiple alley-oops, multiple dunks, there in the open court, or cutting in the half court. He also had the dunk of the night with what looked like some sort of like reverse looking windmill or double pump fake kind of dunk. And I will put it over on the video if you watch this podcast on the video version. And so I do want to note about how much Wemby's been dominating in the paint lately in the month of February. Through 8 February games, he scored double digits in 6 of those contests. So we're seeing that very early version of Wemby. Remember in the first few weeks of the season in October, November, when he came out, just living in the paint. And so that's what he's been doing lately. Now I do want to note that he's been playing a lot of bad defenses or injured defenses at this time. So again, he's able to get where he wants to go, which is in the paint, and really dominating there is what we've seen from Victor lately in this month of February. Stephon Castle has another good game with 18 points, 8 rebounds, and 1 block in just 25 minutes. He, too, got wherever he wanted in the paint with 10 paint points. He also has scored double-digit paint points in 4 of his 7 February games. And I do want to note that Castle has been getting a little bit more rest here in February because of all the big blowout wins by the Spurs, where he's only played over 30 minutes in one of these contests in the month of February. Then finally, De'Aaron Fox, of course, had another good game for the Spurs with 18 points, 5 rebounds. Did have 5 turnovers, though, in 27 minutes against his former team. Fox also got into the paint, did what he wanted. He ends up with 12 paint points, and he, too, has been living in the paint in this month of February with 4 of his 8 February games where he's scoring double digits in the paint. And I also will note that Fox, with these healthy leads for the Spurs, has also been getting some nice rest here in February, where he's played less than 30 minutes in 4 of 8 February games. So my prediction last week was that the Spurs would go 2-0. They did just that. Vegas said they would go 2-0. They did just that. So they met expectations, going 2-0 this past week against the Suns, who are very injured, and also the Kings, who are just playing losing basketball right now. So after that win, the Spurs are now on their second 8-game win streak of the season. This matches their best their longest winning streak that they had in the season earlier in December. We'll see if they can make it a new 9-game winning streak, but that's going to be very tough because on Monday they play the team with the best record in the NBA and also the best record in the Eastern Conference in the Detroit Pistons, who are also on their own winning streak, winning 5 games in a row. So that's going to be a very cool matchup to watch on Monday, which I will break down a little further in this episode. And also through 56 games, the Spurs are on pace now to win 57 to 58 games this year. And they are also closer to the Thunder for first in the West, and they've created more separation against the Denver Nuggets, third in the West. And the reason why I don't want to give the exact games is because OKC and Denver are playing on Sunday when I'm recording this episode. But just know that they're closer to getting first than they are to falling to third in the standings. All right, so now for our second topic, let's talk about the 40-20 rule that the Spurs have reached to become, legit contenders here. So by defeating Phoenix and Sacramento, the Spurs picked up their 40th win of the season, where they are now 40-16 through 56 games. So to recap what this means and why this is significant to kind of just discuss here is that, championship winning coach Phil Jackson with the Lakers and the Bulls, he used to look at this 40-20 rule when gauging whether teams were title contenders or not. So the goal here with this rule is to basically win 40 games before you suffer 20 losses. So you have to go basically at worst 40-19 in your first 59 games. Well, guess what? The Spurs have actually done that even quicker. They've done that. They've got their 40th win in just 56 games. So they've met that mark, this season. And apparently the Spurs had very high expectations for themselves coming into the season. Harrison Barnes postgame did mention that this was one of the goals for the team was to get 40 wins before 20 losses. So that's a check mark, he said, off the Spurs' box was to at least achieve this mark. So that's definitely something that, going into the season, that was a really high expectation for San Antonio of the kind of team they thought they could be at this point. The fact that they actually reached that 40 win mark before 20 losses. Now, why is this so significant? What does history say? Since the 1979-80 season, every single title winning team has met this 40 wins before 20 losses mark, except for 4 outliers. Again, since 1980, only 4 outliers. That's the 94-95 Houston Rockets that won the title, the 2003-04 Pistons that beat the Lakers that won the title, the 05-06 Miami Heat with Dwayne Wade and Shaq, and then also the 2020-21 Milwaukee Bucks with Giannis. Those are the only 4 teams, again, since 1980 that have, won the title, been those exceptions, those rare exceptions, and have not met that 40-20 rule. Everybody else has. And let's just talk about the Spurs specifically, showing that their history shows, yes, their title-winning teams did meet this mark as well. So In 98-99, the Spurs, their first championship, the Spurs were 37-13, which it doesn't say 40 and 19, but we're adjusting because that was a lockout year, so the Spurs, the schedule was shortened that season, so that's why it's 37-13. But that still meets the criteria of the 40-20. Then the 02-03 Spurs did this the year that they beat the Nets. They did this in 57 games, 40-17. So again, this year's Spurs team actually achieved this faster than that 03 title winning Spurs team. The 04-05 Spurs team that beat the Detroit Pistons in 7 games, they reached this mark very quick. They were 40-11 through 51 games, so they achieved this mark by game 51 of the season, and of course they went on to beat the Pistons in 7 games of that series. The 06-07 Spurs, the team that swept the Cleveland Cavaliers with LeBron James, they went 40-18, so they did it in 58 games. Again, this means that this year's Spurs team did this faster than the 07 title team. And then finally, the 13-14 Spurs, I guess you would say redeem team, the team that lost in 13 to the Ray Allen shot, they ended up doing this as well, 40-15 in the 2013-14 championship season, and they did it in 55 games. So they did it 1 game quicker than this current Spurs team. So again, this Spurs team, again, there's no guarantee you're going to win the title if you reach this mark, but it at least puts you in that company of title end up winning teams end up being in this kind of company. They end up reaching this marker. So the Spurs now join just 2 other teams that have done this. That's the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Detroit Pistons that have met this criteria of winning 40 games before suffering 20 losses. So now, again, it's just Spurs, OKC, Detroit. Those, if we're going by this criteria, those are the legit title contenders if we're only looking at this 40-20 rule so far this season. Now, there's one more team that could join them. That's the Boston Celtics, but they have a very, very difficult path to do this. So here's what's going on with the Celtics. They are currently 36-19 as of Sunday afternoon that I'm recording this. They do play the Los Angeles Lakers in LA on Sunday. So again, if they defeat the Lakers, then they're still in contention for this. If they lose to the Lakers, then it's over for them. They've already suffered 20 losses before they can get to 40. So even if they beat the Lakers, the Celtics still have a very difficult schedule to get these 40 wins. Their next 3 games after the Lakers are the Suns this coming week, the Nuggets, and then the Brooklyn Nets. So again, the Celtics need to go undefeated in their next 4 games in order to achieve this mark. If they get a 20th loss at any time in these next 4 games, then they are eliminated, which just leaves Spurs, Thunder, and Pistons as the only 3 teams that have qualified for this marker. None of the other 26 NBA teams can achieve this goal. They've already suffered too many losses to get here before 40 wins. So again, that just puts the Spurs in that elite company. And again, it doesn't guarantee you're going to win a title, but at least puts you in the history path of teams that have won titles, have met at least this criteria. With the Spurs meeting this, title contention criteria, I did want to just see what ESPN's BPI model said about the Spurs as of Sunday afternoon. So, of course, the Spurs still have a 100% chance to make the playoffs. They have a 72% chance to advance to the second round, behind only OKC, who has a 94% chance, and Denver, who has a 73% chance among Western Conference teams. The Spurs have a 38% chance to reach the conference finals, the Western Conference Finals, behind OKC, who has a 79% chance, but they are now ahead of Denver at 35% chance. So that's very interesting. Again, Spurs is, because that's likely the most likely outcome. Let's just say the Spurs and Nuggets win round 1 of that, whatever series they're in. If the standings hold right now where Spurs would be 2 and Denver would be 3, then that's going to be the second round series right there. It would be Spurs versus Denver. And again, according to this BPI model, the Spurs have a 38% chance of moving on to round 3, whereas the Nuggets have a 35%. Again, very, very close, obviously. But again, the Spurs are ahead of Denver in that category. Next up, going to the NBA Finals. So the Spurs have a 10% chance of reaching the NBA Finals, behind OKC, who has a 67% chance, and then Denver has a 13% chance. And then finally, the Spurs have a 5% chance of winning it all, winning the title this season, behind the Thunder, who are still the favorites with a 53% chance, the Detroit Pistons 10% chance, the New York Knicks 8% chance, the Cleveland Cavaliers 7.1% chance, and then the Denver Nuggets 7% chance. And of course, we do want to note that a lot of those Eastern Conference teams are ahead of the Spurs and Nuggets because they have an easier path to get to the finals playing in the Eastern Conference, whereas Spurs, OKC, Denver, they have to go through some really tough rounds every single round of their series in the playoff path. Let's keep going. All right, for my next topic, I want to talk about how the Spurs have been taking care of business lately. So whether that's a bad team that has a below 500 record or a team that might have a good record, but maybe they're sitting out multiple players due to injury, that's kind of what I want to talk about, how the Spurs have been doing so far for one this season, but then also lately in their last 16 games where they've really been dominating. So as favorites this year, so this is for the whole season, the Spurs are now 30-10 as favorites this year, again, in 40 games. That's a 75% win percentage. So again, they're winning 75% of the games where they're favored against any opponent this season. Against below 500 teams, the Spurs, for the most part, have really taken care of business. They are 21-5, again, an 81% win percentage. They're beating those bad teams. There haven't been too many losses against those bad teams this year, just 5 of them. When leading by double digits, the Spurs are 34-11. So again, when they build a double-digit lead, that's a 76% win percentage. So again, that's pretty much matches their win percentage as when they're favorites. So again, when leading by 15 points, the Spurs are 28-3. Again, they haven't had too many letdowns. That's a 90% win percentage. Again, only 3 times have teams come back from behind by 15 and come back to beat the Spurs this entire season. And then finally, when leading by 20 points in the game, the Spurs remain undefeated at 17-0. So again, the Spurs have only led by 20 in 17 games, but at least they've never coughed up a lead and end up losing that game when leading by 20 points. Now, here's why I want to focus on the last 16 games for the Spurs, because this is really when they've been really taking off lately. So we do want to note that right after Christmas up until mid-January, in those first 10 games of that stretch, the Spurs had their worst stretch of the season playing basketball. They went 4-6, again, a losing record. But since then, since that mid-January marker, it begins with that game against the Milwaukee Bucks where the Spurs won a blowout. The Spurs are 13-3 in their last 16 games. So again, 13-3. So here's what I want to look at. I want to look at how much have the Spurs led by double digits, and then how much have they actually won by double digits, for the season and then these last 16 games. So let's just that's how I'm going to go through this criteria. So they've led by double digits in 45 games. They've only won by double digits in 26 games. So again, we see that, for the season, yes, a lot of these games do come back to becoming dogfights or within at least 10 points for San Antonio. However, lately in these last 16 games, they've kind of, led by double digits and then won pretty comfortable by double digits as well. So here's that number. They've led by double digits in 14 of their last 16 games, and they've won by double digits in 11. So again, just a -3 there. Pretty good. Again, they build a double-digit lead, they end up winning by double digits. So that's a good marker in these last 16 games of how they're taking care of business. Let's talk about 15-point leads. They've led by 15 points in 31 games, and they've won by 15 or more points in 12 games. So again, that again that's a huge difference there. That games end up becoming a little bit closer than when the Spurs initially lead by 15. Looking at the last 16 games, where they've led by 15 points in 12 of these last 16 games, and they've only won by 15 or more in 5 of them. So again, that's a -7 difference. So teams are still coming back to make it a little bit more of a dogfight lately. Now let's talk about 20-point leads. The Spurs, like I mentioned, have led by 20 in 17 games this year, but they've only won by 20 or more in 6 games. So that's a pretty significant drop off, where we see that teams do end up coming back to make the game closer, whether that's the Spurs building a big lead early by 20 plus and not being able to hold it, or maybe that's just the reserves coming into the fourth quarter and not being able to win comfortably by more than 20 points. In the last 16 as well, this has kind of been happening, where the Spurs have led by 20 in 8 of their games. So half of their games they've led by 20, but they've only won by 20 or more in 2 of those games. So I do also want to mention how the Spurs have done a great job in these last 16 games of not, falling into double-digit holes. Part of it is the opponents they're playing, but then part of it is just them, again, taking care of business. They're coming in more focused in these games. So they've only trailed by double digits in 4 of their last 16 games. So again, they really haven't fallen into these double-digit holes based on the teams that they're playing lately. So again, I think we could say that lately in these last 16 games, they're doing a lot better. They're doing a much better job of kind of taking care of business against those teams that they should beat on paper, whether they're favorites or whether those teams have bad records, or if those teams are just missing key players due to injury or just resting players. All right, let's go through some news and notes now. Let's talk about a signing the Spurs made this past week. So on Tuesday last week, the Spurs signed veteran big man Mason Plumlee to a 10-day contract. So Plumlee has not played in a game in these last 2 games. He's been on the injury report listed as return to competition reconditioning because he underwent surgery on his right groin back in late December with the Charlotte Hornets. So he's basically easing his way toward making his return to the court. Now, his first 10-day contract does expire on Thursday. which means that once it expires, he's able to sign one more 10-day contract with the Spurs, and then from there, if they want him for the rest of the season and he's interested in staying with San Antonio, then he can sign a standard contract going forward. He can only sign up to 2 10-day contracts. I do think because of how patient the Spurs are being with letting him come back from injury, that is probably going to be the plan. And this is similar to what we saw the Spurs do last year with Bismack Biyombo. If we recall, Wemby, of course, went out for the season in February with his blood clot injury, and so from there, the Spurs initially signed Biyombo to a 10-day contract. Then they let him sign another 10-day contract, and then from there they signed him to a rest of season contract. So I think that's probably the approach they'll probably take with Mason Plumlee. And again, even when Plumlee is healthy and ready to go on the court, I don't see him playing a lot right now in the Spurs' 10-man rotation. Again, they have a pretty solid rotation there with Wemby starting at center and then Luke Kornet backing him up. And then of course, maybe they get some French vanilla minutes out there together. But I think that the Spurs definitely were looking for another, backup center option because they were linked to Goga Bitadze, Robert Williams III, Gershon Yabusele at the trade deadline. And of course, they didn't trade for any of those players. But obviously, the place on their roster they were looking for some additional depth was at center. And so I think that's the point of bringing in Plumlee is that, yes, he's not going to play a lot, but in the event that, let's just say it's a game or a couple of games where Wemby gets in foul trouble or Kornet gets in foul trouble or they have to miss a few games due to injury or rest, well, then now they have a better, defensive center here with Mason Plumlee who can maybe give them better minutes than what Bismack Biyombo have been doing on defense or Kelly Olynyk or even the small ball fives, because as I wrote about in a piece this past week, the Spurs' defense, of course, is elite with Wemby. They're very good with Luke Kornet, but then they just completely fall apart if neither of them are on the floor together or on the floor at all. Whether it's Wemby or Kornet off the floor, their defense is just terrible. And then also so that's the reason why, again, they were probably looking for another option as a third option in the event Wemby or Kornet has to miss some time. And so maybe they're hoping that Mason Plumlee can do that out there with his, I've seen different sites list him as either 6'10" or 7 foot. So just to have another, bigger presence there at backup center in the event Wemby or Kornet have to be out of a game. And then for my other news and notes I want to discuss is how the Spurs have become must-see TV, or we should just say pretty much Wemby has become must-see TV. On Friday this past week, the NBA and the Spurs announced that the Boston Celtics game against the Spurs and the Chicago Bulls game against the Spurs in March will both be on Peacock. And so if we look at the Spurs, they're going to be on national TV a lot up until the playoffs. Of their final 26 games, 14 are now on national TV. So again, 54%, more than half of their games left of the season are now national TV games. So again, the NBA is getting ready because obviously, Wemby's one of the up and coming stars for the NBA right now. So of course he's must see TV, but also the league wants, fans in the NBA overall to get familiar with the Spurs team. Some of these role players, some of these players coming off the bench, because this is a team they expect to have a deep playoff run, considering that they are the second best team there in the Western Conference and the third best team overall in the NBA by record. All right, for our final topic, let's discuss the upcoming 4 games for the Spurs this week. So again, this is going to be a very busy week for San Antonio. After only having 2 games this past week, it's about to get going. I think that when I had looked at the Spurs' remainder of the schedule, I think they have 4 and 3 games almost every week from now until to the end of the season. So again, it's going to be a packed schedule going forward for the Spurs. So let's first use the criteria that I like to look at, which is the last 10 games when I preview these matchups. So in their last 10 games, the Spurs are playing excellent basketball, 9-1. They have the 3rd best offense during this stretch and 4th best defense. So again, top 5 on both offense and defense in these last 10 games. So on Monday, they go to Detroit to play the Pistons for the first time this season. The Pistons are also playing excellent basketball, 8-2 in their last 10. They have the 5th best offense and 2nd best defense in this stretch. So this one's tough because to figure out. No, I know I did just get the Spurs and the Spurs and Pistons injury reports right now, and so the Spurs are going to have their full 10-man rotation available. Nobody's injured on the 10-man rotation for the Spurs, and the Pistons have most of their team except for one key defender who could who's a defensive player of the year candidate this year, and also a player who's going to likely be on one of the all defensive teams, and that's Isaiah Stewart. As we recall, he's receiving right now. He's under I think it's a 7-game suspension for one of the fights that broke out, earlier this season, right before the All-Star break, between the Pistons and one of their opponents. I think it was Charlotte. Yeah, it was Charlotte. So anyway, Stewart will be out of this game because, again, he's serving his suspension right now. But the Pistons do have all their other core players available, and so. Again, I really think this one's a coin toss because we haven't seen these two teams play each other. We do want to consider that it is on the road for the Spurs. They're in Detroit against a very good team. I'm going to say that the Pistons win. Let me explain my thinking why. I just think that right now against these bad and injured teams that the Spurs have been playing these last few weeks, they've been able to do whatever they want offensively. And the thing that San Antonio most wants to do against most teams every night is they want to live in the paint. They want, Wemby to dominate in the paint, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, Keldon Johnson, all these guys, they want to get in the paint, get to the free throw line. And yes, sometimes their three-point shooting's there. It's been better lately, but then sometimes they have some off nights. Now, the fact that Detroit's a top, they're playing really good basketball, again, second best defense in the league these last 10 games. I'm going to say that that's what really good defenses do. They take away what you want to do on offense. They take away your main strength on offense. So I think that the Pistons, they're going to scheme somehow to make it difficult for the Spurs to get into the paint and really dominate the paint with Tobias Harris, Jalen Duren, and then all those wing defenders they have coming off the bench. They got All-Star Thompson. They've got Ron Holland. Just a lot of wingy defenders there that can really muck things up. So again, I think that that's going to be the Pistons' game plan, is to try to take away the paint from the Spurs as much as possible, which leaves the outside shooting for the Spurs. Is it going to be there for San Antonio? Again, that's always one of the big question marks for them. Are they going to have a good night shooting from three? I know they changed up the starting lineup where they now have Julian Champagnie and Devin Vassell out there to spread the floor. So again, because it's on the road, because I think that the Pistons will make it difficult for the Spurs on offense, I'm going to go ahead and take the Pistons in this game. Again, it wouldn't shock me though if the Spurs end up winning. And I am eager to see, one of the matchups I'm eager to see is how Stephon Castle defends Cade Cunningham, because obviously we know Cade is the go-to player for the Pistons, and we know that Castle wants to have the best matchup on defense every night, play the most difficult offensive player, or guard that offensive player. And so again, that's kind of the matchup I'm also watching. If Castle makes it very difficult for Cade, then the Spurs have a really good shot. But if Cade can kind of get where he wants to with screening action, with pick and rolls, then maybe it is more difficult for the Spurs. So again, right now, because it's the first meeting, I am taking the Pistons to win this game. On Wednesday, the Spurs travel to Toronto, again on the rodeo road trip. The Raptors are playing pretty good basketball as well, 6-4 in their last 10. They have the 24th ranked offense, though, during the stretch, and the 9th ranked defense. So again, because of how much their offense is struggling, and because the Spurs themselves are an elite defense, I'm going to say that the Spurs win this game. Again, I'm really banking on San Antonio's defense more so for the reason why I'm picking the Spurs here. So again, I think the Spurs win that game. Then on Thursday, the Spurs are on the second out of a back-to-back, making a short trip from Toronto to Brooklyn to play the Nets for the second time this season. The Nets are 3-7 in their last 10 games, really struggling. They have the worst offense in these last 10 games. On offense, they're 30th. And defensively, they're slightly above league average in the last 10 at 16th. So again, I think the Spurs win this game comfortably. And my question is just, how much are they favored by? Are they favored by more than double digits, considering that it's the second out of a back-to-back against a losing team? And then to close out the stretch this week, the Spurs are on the road on Sunday afternoon in New York to play the New York Knicks. The Knicks are also playing good basketball right now. They're 7-3 in their last 10 games. They have the 6th ranked offense and 6th ranked defense during the stretch. I'm going to say the Spurs win this one, even though the Knicks are playing better defense lately. And of course, we know they made the big addition of adding Jose Alvarado at the trade deadline, who's been really coming through for them, making some key plays. We also know that the Spurs will see Jeremy Sohan, in this matchup as well. I don't know how much he'll play. He hasn't really been playing too much with the Knicks, although he's at least gotten on the court more than when he was with the Spurs. So again, because of the way the defenders the Knicks have in their defense, I just don't trust them that they can stop Wemby. I think that against the Knicks, Wemby can get where he wants to against their defense. I know they're going to probably have OG Anunoby guarding him, but if he can get past OG Anunoby, or they can find him some spots against Karl Anthony Towns, then I think Victor can get where he wants to go. So again, and also just being in that atmosphere of MSG, that the star players like to just go off there, and so I think that's a place where Wemby really likes to, he's gonna like going off there or trying to have a really good game against the MSG crowd there. And so again, I'm gonna go ahead and say the Spurs win. But that game, too, wouldn't shock me if the Knicks end up winning that game either. So my prediction this week is that the Spurs go 3-1, though 2-2 or 4-0 are I could also see those happening. But again, for now, I'll go ahead and say 3-1 this upcoming week. As for my next pod, because it is a busy week with 4 games, I probably won't have that pod up till Monday morning the following week. So once the Spurs finish up these next 4 games. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.